Imagine two giants standing in a room together. Each one holds a weapon powerful enough to destroy the entire world. They stare at each other, angry, afraid. Neither attacks. Because they know if one of them fires, both of them die. So they wait, they spy, they compete. They fight through other people, in other countries, on other continents. For almost 50 years, the whole world holds its breath. This is not a war of bullets and bombs between two armies on a battlefield. This is something stranger, something colder. This is the story of the Cold War. Hi, and welcome to Daily English Origins. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started. The Cold War was not a traditional war. A traditional war involves two countries sending soldiers to fight each other directly. But the Cold War was different. It was a long and dangerous competition between two superpowers. A superpower is a country with enormous military strength, economic power, and global influence. The two superpowers were the United States of America, USA, and the Soviet Union, USSR. The Cold War lasted from approximately 1947 to 1991. That is more than 4 decades of tension, fear, and competition. The word cold in Cold War means there was no direct hot fighting between these two countries. But make no mistake, it was very real, and it was very dangerous. To understand the Cold War, we must first understand the world that came before it. In 1939, a terrible global conflict began. This was World War II. A massive war that pulled almost every nation on earth into its destruction. By the time it ended in 1945, more than 70 million people were dead. Cities across Europe and Asia were completely destroyed. The world was exhausted and broken. But two countries came out of this war stronger, the United States and the Soviet Union. They had fought together as allies to defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. The USA and the USSR were heroes together, but their friendship would not last long. Underneath the cooperation, there was a deep and serious disagreement. They did not see the world the same way. The United States believed in capitalism and democracy. Capitalism is an economic system where people and businesses can own property and compete freely to make money. Democracy is a political system where citizens vote for their leaders and enjoy personal freedoms, like the freedom of speech and religion. Americans believed these ideas were the best. The Soviet Union believed in communism. Communism is a very different system. In communism, the government controls the economy. Private businesses are not allowed. The state owns the factories, the farms, and the resources. The Soviet government believed that this system created equality. They believed that capitalism made the rich more powerful and left the poor behind. Soviet leaders did not allow free elections or freedom of speech. These two ideologies were completely opposite. An ideology is a system of ideas and beliefs that guides how society should be run. Both sides believed deeply and passionately that their way was right and the other way was wrong. This disagreement would shape the entire world for the next 5 decades. By 1946, it was clear that the former Allies were becoming rivals. A rival is a competitor who wants what you want and works against you. The Soviet Union began taking control of countries in Eastern Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and East Germany came under Soviet influence. The USSR helped communist governments take power. The people had very little freedom. Winston Churchill said, "A great iron curtain had fallen across Europe in 1946. An iron curtain is not a real curtain. It is a metaphor, a word picture. Churchill meant that Europe was now divided into two separate worlds. On one side, the free democratic West, led by America. On the other side, the controlled communist East, controlled by the Soviet Union. This division was not just political, it was physical. Walls, fences, and military borders separated families, cities, and nations. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. An atomic bomb is a weapon of extraordinary destructive power. It uses nuclear energy to create a massive explosion. The bombs destroyed both cities almost completely and killed over 200,000 people. The world was shocked. A new and terrifying era had begun. At first, only the United States had this technology. The Soviet Union worked in secret. In 1949, the USSR successfully tested its own atomic bomb. The world changed overnight. Now both superpowers had nuclear weapons. Each side began building more and more bombs. This dangerous buildup is called an arms race. An arms race is when two countries try to outmatch each other with more powerful weapons. By the 1950s, both countries had enough nuclear weapons to destroy human civilization. This created a new kind of fear, a fear that the entire world could end. Even though the USA and USSR never fought directly, they fought indirectly through proxy wars. A proxy war is where two powerful countries support opposite sides of a smaller war, using other nations as the battlefield. The first major proxy war was the Korean War, 1950. Korea had been divided after World War II. North was communist, South democratic. North supported by Soviet Union and China, South by the United States. In June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. The United States sent soldiers. China sent soldiers to help the North. The fighting was brutal. The war lasted 3 years and killed millions of people. When it ended in 1953, Korea was still divided, just as it had been before. The line between North and South Korea still exists today. The Korean War showed Cold War conflict, a devastating war fought on someone else's land. Fighting with soldiers was dangerous. Both sides also fought in the shadows. They used espionage, spying, to gather secret information about the enemy. Intelligence agencies were formed. The United States created the CIA. The Soviet Union had its own powerful spy organization called the KGB. KGB, Komitet Государственной Безопасности, means Committee for State Security. Spies on both sides risked their lives every day. They worked undercover in foreign countries. They stole military secrets, photographed classified documents, and listened to private conversations. Sometimes spies were caught and executed. Sometimes they were exchanged between the two sides. In secret meetings, often on bridges in divided cities like Berlin. The spy world of the Cold War was dark, complicated, and very real. It was a war of information, of secrets, and of trust. Who was friend? By the early 1950s, the Cold War was spreading across the entire globe. The United States was deeply worried about the spread of communism. This worry had a name: the domino theory. The domino theory. If one country fell to communism, others would fall too. One by one, like a row of dominoes. If one falls, it knocks down the next. To stop this, America created a strategy called containment. Containment means preventing communism from spreading beyond where it already existed. The USA gave money, weapons, and military support to governments that resisted communism. The Soviet Union did the opposite, supported communist movements and revolutionary groups. In Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, the world was becoming a giant chessboard, and every country was a piece. Competition between the superpowers was not only military, but also scientific and technological, and deeply psychological, relating to the mind and emotions. Both sides wanted to prove their system produced the best scientists and technology, and the best future for humanity. This competition reached its highest point in outer space. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched a small metal sphere into orbit. It was called Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. A human-made object sent into space to circle the Earth about the size of a beach ball. It beeped as it traveled through the darkness above the planet. To Soviet citizens, Sputnik was proof that communism was superior. To Americans, it was a shocking wake-up call. If the Soviets could put a satellite in space, could they also send a nuclear weapon? The space race had officially begun, and America was already behind. The space race accelerated quickly. In April 1961, the Soviet Union shocked the world again. Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to travel into outer space. He orbited the Earth once in 108 minutes, landing safely, a global hero. The Soviets celebrated. The Americans were embarrassed. President John F. Kennedy responded with one of the most ambitious promises in history. In May 1961, he declared America would land a man on the moon. It seemed almost impossible, but NASA worked with extraordinary determination. 8 years later, on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. His words were broadcast live. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. America had won the most dramatic race in human history. The moon landing was a powerful message. The American system could reach the stars. Of all the moments in the Cold War, none was more terrifying than the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. Cuba is a small island nation just 90 miles south of Florida in the USA. In 1959, Fidel Castro established a communist government in Cuba. This put a communist country right at America's doorstep. In summer 1962, American spy planes discovered something alarming. The Soviet Union was secretly building nuclear missile launch sites in Cuba. These missiles could reach American cities in minutes. President Kennedy was furious and frightened. He ordered a naval blockade of Cuba. Soviet ships carrying more missiles were already sailing toward Cuba. For 13 days, the world watched in horror as superpowers faced nuclear war. Finally, Khrushchev agreed to remove missiles from Cuba. Kennedy promised not to invade Cuba and removed American missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended. The world exhaled, but it came terrifyingly close to the end. Before we continue, if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please take just 1 second to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Every like and new subscriber helps us create more stories. Thank you. Now, let's continue. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed how dangerous direct confrontation could be. So the superpowers returned to fighting through proxy wars. The most long and painful of these was the Vietnam War. Like Korea, Vietnam had been divided into a communist North and a democratic South. North Vietnam was supported by the Soviet Union and China, South Vietnam by the United States. American involvement in Vietnam grew slowly, then exploded in 1965 with troops. The American military was powerful, but Vietnam's jungles were brutal and unforgiving. North Vietnamese and guerrilla fighters fought with extraordinary determination on their own land. The war dragged on for years. Millions of citizens protested in the streets. Young people burned their military draft cards. The anti-war movement grew. By 1975, American forces withdrew. North Vietnam unified the country under communist rule. It was a devastating loss, military, emotional, and psychological for the United States. While leaders competed for global power, ordinary people lived with the Cold War every day. In the United States, school children practiced duck and cover drills. They were taught to hide under their desks in case of a nuclear explosion. Families built fallout shelters, stocked with food and water to survive. Fear was constant. In communist countries, life was very different. The government controlled information. Newspapers, radio, and television only reported what the state approved. Citizens could not freely travel abroad. In East Germany, the Berlin Wall was built, 1961. A concrete barrier that physically divided the city of Berlin. Families were separated. People who tried to cross illegally risked being shot by guards. The Berlin Wall became the most powerful symbol of the Cold War. A physical monument to the idea that freedom was not free and ideology could imprison. By the early 1970s, both sides were exhausted. The Vietnam War damaged America's confidence. The Soviet economy struggled from military spending. Both countries quietly decided to reduce the temperature of the conflict. This period of reduced tension was called détente. Détente means a period when rival countries cooperate and negotiate. American President Richard Nixon made a historic visit to Communist China in 1972. This was a bold diplomatic move through negotiation and communication. Nixon also signed major arms control agreements, SALT, with Leonid Brezhnev. Both sides agreed to limit nuclear missiles. It was not peace. But for a brief and fragile moment, the world felt a little safer. The giants were still standing in the room, but they had put down their weapons. The calm of détente did not last. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The USSR wanted to support a struggling communist government, but Afghans resisted fiercely. The United States secretly provided weapons and money to the Mujahideen fighters. The Soviets found themselves trapped in a long, bloody, and unwinnable war. Many historians call the Afghan War the Soviet Union's Vietnam, a conflict that drained its military, its finances, and its spirit. A new American president, Ronald Reagan, took office in 1981. He did not believe in managing the Cold War. He believed in winning it. Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, words that energized Americans. He dramatically increased military spending, forcing the Soviets to match. The Soviet economy, already weak, began to crack under the pressure. Reagan also proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, a missile defense shield in space. Critics called it Star Wars. It frightened Soviet leaders. They couldn't compete. Inside the Soviet Union, a quiet revolution was beginning. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, a reform-minded leader, came to power. Gorbachev understood the Soviet system was broken. The economy was stagnant. Ordinary Soviet citizens stood in long lines for basic goods like bread and shoes. Technology was falling behind the West. Corruption was everywhere. Gorbachev introduced two revolutionary new policies, glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost, openness, allowed citizens to speak freely and access more information. Perestroika, restructuring, was a plan to reform the Soviet economic system. These reforms were meant to save the Soviet Union. But instead, they unleashed forces Gorbachev could not control. When people are given a little freedom, they often want more. And across the Soviet Empire, people began to demand exactly that. The year 1989 was one of the most extraordinary years in modern history. Across Eastern Europe, ordinary people rose up against their communist governments. In Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Romania, massive peaceful protests filled the streets. One by one, communist governments collapsed. The world watched in amazement. And then came the night that changed everything. November 9th, 1989. East German government announced citizens could cross the Berlin Wall freely. The news spread instantly. Thousands of people rushed to the wall from both sides. They climbed on top of it. They embraced strangers. They wept. They began to tear it down with bare hands and hammers, piece by piece. The Berlin Wall, the most powerful symbol of the Cold War, was falling. Television cameras captured every moment and broadcast the images around the world. People cried in living rooms from New York to Tokyo. It was not just a wall coming down, it was an idea crumbling into dust. The idea that human beings could be permanently divided by ideology. Gorbachev's reforms had opened a door he could not close. The 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union began to demand independence. Independence means the freedom to govern yourself as a nation. Lithuania declared independence in March 1990. Others followed quickly. In August 1991, communist hardliners attempted a coup. A coup is when a group tries to seize control of a government illegally. The coup failed within 3 days, but it fatally weakened Gorbachev's authority. On December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as president of the Soviet Union. He gave a short speech, then the Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin. The red flag with the golden hammer and sickle for the last time. The Russian flag rose in its place. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. Not with a nuclear explosion or a great battle, but quietly with a resignation speech on a cold December evening. The Cold War was over. The end of the Cold War reshaped the entire world. 15 new independent nations emerged from the ruins of the Soviet Union, including Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the Baltic states. Germany was reunified. East and West became one country again for the first time since 1945. The United States stood as the world's only remaining superpower. Many people spoke of a new world order, a phrase meaning a new era of global peace and cooperation. But the legacy of the Cold War was complicated. The arms race produced tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, many still existing. Proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and other countries killed millions. Most were civilians, ordinary people not wanting superpower competition. Nations used as battlegrounds were left with poverty, trauma, and political instability. The Cold War had no single, clean ending with clear winners and losers. Some countries gained freedom. Others were left with decades of pain. The Cold War teaches us something profound about human nature and power. Two nations, believing in their ideology, brought the world to destruction many times. They spent trillions on weapons instead of schools, hospitals, and roads. They sacrificed the lives and freedoms of millions of people far from their borders. And yet, the Cold War also produced remarkable things. It pushed human beings into outer space. It created the Internet, ARPANET. It inspired great literature, films, music, and art of the 20th century. It showed that ordinary citizens can change the direction of history. Students marching, families tearing down walls with bare hands. The Cold War reminds us that ideas are powerful. Powerful enough to divide a world, and powerful enough to bring the walls down. Hey there, just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really helps to create better English videos. Your support means the world. Thank you.